Diamond Boy by Michael Williams.
Diamond Boy, Prologue. How did you get here, Patson? Sometimes the simple questions are the hardest to answer. My tongue lies like a chisel in my mouth, my eyes are leaden. I swim from a place of no feeling, moving steadily upward into a world of sensation, to the dark, throbbing pain that lives in my leg. My old companion has not left me in this new place. It waits for me as I drift to the surface, sharpening its teeth. Patson, how did you get here? Is it the voice of my father? I feel his hand resting on my arm, my father who talks till your head spins, until, when you are exhausted from the journey of his words, you get the answer you need, like a small cut diamond sparkling with clarity. But here, in this room, there are too many shades of white. The bed is too high off the floor, the sheets are starch stiff, the pillows too big. Even so, I am grateful to be alive. I rest my head against the overside pillow and turn to the window. The enormous flat-topped mountain looms over the city. A huge cloud rides the faraway cliffs, racing down the grey rock face as if driven by an invisible force. Where is Jesus, I mumble, and Grace? I must look to Grace. I struggle to rise, but I am too weak. My head is heavy, my body pressed into the bed. You're safe, Patson. Can't it be easier, Baba? Isn't there a shortcut I can take? You have to tell everything, son. You have to tell it all. The story you tell makes you who you are. Shh, rest. We'll speak again later. Yes, rest now, son. That's the most sensible thing to do in these circumstances. The body needs time to recover. You will be strong again, but first you must rest. You are right, Baba. You were always right. Chapter 1. Wake up, Patson, Grace whispered into my ear. The diamond fields are close now, just over that elephant head mountain. My eyelids were prized open and my sister's face came into focus. For a brief moment I saw hints of my mother in her eyes, and then it was all Grace, gently poking my cheek with her finger, her breath warm and soft on my skin. I must have been asleep for a couple of hours. I remember only closing my eyes and wishing we had never left home, angry with my father for having no money, hating the wife for her power over him. Now the sun was resting just above the thorn trees and the air was filled with amber dust. And then my head slammed against the window as the driver swerved to avoid one pothole only to hit another. Here in Zimbabwe, we say that a man who drives straight must be drunk. I longed to get out of the cramped car. We had driven for 14 hours across the dry plains of Matabeleland, over the Runda and the Munyati rivers, and through the hills of Masivingo province. My father always said that a journey should change your life in some way. Well, I suppose that when you have nothing, a journey promises everything. As long as we arrived at the place better than the one we had left, I would be happy. I had known for some time that my family was heading downhill. I could see it in the drawn face of my father as yet another day passed with no food in the house. I could hear it in the shrill voice of the wife, who ranted hysterically and wept as she hid from the neighbors, and I could feel it when I hugged my little sister, her bones so fragile. Grace is right, son. We almost at the Morangi. My father leaned over the front seat and handed me a water bottle. Before I had a chance to drink it, the wife snatched it away. I'm thirsty, she said. Joseph, my legs are stiff and my back is a knot. I want to pee. Tell the driver to stop right now. Sylvia, I don't think. I mean it, Joseph. Now. The driver looked at my father's wife in the rearview mirror and shook his head. We can't stop here. In another 30 minutes, we stop. You stop now, or I mess in your car. The driver was no match for the wife. When my father turned to him and shrugged his shoulders, the driver understood. Just 2 minutes, okay? It's dangerous here, he warned, checking the highway behind him before pulling off. The police check every car that stops. On the side of the road, the wife insisted he open the boot of the car. Joseph, I asked you to pack toilet paper, she berated my father, her hands on her hips. I should have done it myself. I can't trust you to do anything. This bag is a mess. I got out the car and left them to fuss. I'll help you, Amai. I know where it is. Grace had come to the rescue. My sister seemed to have a built-in early warning system when it came to the wife's moods. She would appear, sometimes magically, to smooth out an awkward moment or to distract the wife from turning on my father, always able to restore the peace, as she did now by pulling out a small bag from the boot, quickly finding the toilet paper and handing it to the wife with a smile. The driver swore under his breath, anxiously glancing down the road, while my father fussed and fretted, trying to keep his wife happy. Grace's Elephant Head Mountain was really only a mass of boulders which rose above the surrounding smaller hills and towered over the distant flat-topped fever trees. Inviting wisps of cool clouds hung below its highest point. I imagined a heart-pumping run to the top to look out over the bush, east to Mozambique, south to South Africa, and back to Bulawayo in the west. In the grass on the other side of the road, something moved, an impala, but then, cautiously, three boys emerged, staring straight through me. In the fading light, their legs and arms and even their faces appeared to be dusted a light grey. We stared silently at each other, the tarred ribbon of the road between us. Then one of the boys lifted both his hands and slowly moved them together till his index fingers and thumbs met in front of his face, forming a diamond. Was it a signal? I could not read his expression in the tight space framed by his fingers. He nodded abruptly. Then the boy to his right, with a grey ghost smile, pulled something out of his pocket, offering it as he gently tapped his outstretched palm with two fingers. The third boy stepped back a little, glancing around furtively, his eyes pleading, "No, get back in the car now." The driver grabbed my arm, pulling me back to the car, shoved me inside, and slammed the door. He scooted Grace into the back seat and shouted at the boys across the road, but they had gone, disappeared into the tall yellow grass. "Who are they?" I asked as the driver pulled away in a cloud of dust. "They are Malashas, smugglers, signing their death warrants by sticking their necks out. They'll be dead in a week." He drove straight over the potholes, fleeing this place of grey ghost boys. What did they want? Money. Money for diamonds. He lifted his hand from the wheel to make the diamond shape with his thumbs and index finger. Now is the safest time of day for them to sell their stones. Army patrols are blinded by the setting sun. "But they were just boys," said my father. The driver nodded. Gwejana, children diamond smugglers, gambling with their lives by becoming thieves and smugglers. This road is littered with their bones. "What are you talking about? I didn't see anything. Why doesn't anyone ever tell me what's going on?" complained the wife. I opened the window, and her words were lost as I leant out to study. The bright, the bush flitting past, the sky's orange glow sinking slowly behind the distant hills. The driver continued, talking quickly and strangling the steering wheel. "The closer we get to the mining fields, the purer the stones become and the more danger we are in," he said. "Those Malashas are trying to sell their diamonds outside their syndicate. They think they can take the money for themselves, but there are spies everywhere, and if those boys are reported to the syndicate boss, or if the police catch them selling diamonds, well, I've heard terrible things." "My brother James says there are diamonds for everyone," said the wife, "and he runs the best mine in Marangia. He should know. I'm sure you're exaggerating." "James Binder hates my Melishas," muttered the driver, glaring at me in the rearview mirror. "Don't talk to those boys, ever. You understand?" Diamond Boy, Chapter 2. Diamonds for everyone. Those were the exact words that had dripped like a leaking tap into my father's ear at breakfast, after school, late at night when the lights were out and I could hear the wife's needling voice through the thin walls. "Why must I suffer here with a man who cannot provide for his family? Why should I be poor the rest of my life? I could have had any man in my village and I got a useless teacher. There is money to be made in Marangia, Joseph. People all over the country are travelling to the diamond fields to make their fortunes, and we sit here with nothing. James says that in Marangia there are diamonds for everyone." I had never met Uncle James, but I knew I would not like him. He was the one who had told the wife that in Marangia people were picking money off the ground, and that if her husband were more of a man, he would become a rich diamond miner too. My father was one of the best teachers in Bulawayo and had won the Outstanding Teacher Award at Milton High School for 4 years running. The wife claimed it was not a real job because he made no money. This was not true either, because he did make money, suitcases full, millions and millions of Zimbabwean dollars. It was not his fault that the money was worthless. "I thought when I married a teacher I would be someone, but every year we become poorer and poorer," the wife had ranted, after he'd come back from the government office with 3 months' back pay and placed a large suitcase on the kitchen table. "Now people feel sorry for me. I would have done better marrying a beggar." He had opened the case, and we'd all stared at the thick bricks of Zim dollars wrapped in elastic and stacked in neat rows. "What are we supposed to do with this? Eat it? What will this buy us, Joseph? Nothing, nothing." The wife had dared at the suitcase, then dug her in her hands and thrown stacks of money at my father. "This is not worth more than $2 American, and you gratefully accepted it?" My father just sat at the table, cleaning his glasses as Grace built a small house with the bricks of cash. Nodding towards Grace, the wife had added, "That's all your back pay money is good for, Joseph Moyle. Child's play." "There will come a day when our economy will recover," said my father. "When Mugabe dies, things will be better. We just have to be patient." "Patience in a madhouse, you mean?" retorted the wife. My father met every problem he faced with thoughtful composure. He lived in a world of books and was at peace with the life he had chosen. The inward contentment often infuriated the wife, who, if she had not been afraid of the power of his beloved books, would have thrown every single one of them at him. I watched how gracefully he bore his young wife's taunting, how he smiled at his friends who teased him about who wore the plants in his house. It amazed me that he had never, not once in the 3 years they were married, said anything bad about the wife to Grace or me. There was one subject even his pretty wife knew was sacred, and that was his occupation. Teaching is not a job, son, he often said to me. It is a calling. When you are born with a gift, God instructs you to use it carefully. You have been given a gift too, Patson, and you may not allow it to lie fallow. Even though you don't yet know what your gift is, when you find it, you must nurture it and let it grow and become your life's work. Sometimes my father's words sounded like he was reading from the Bible, but maybe it was his way of tuning out his worries and the wife. Although I was sure no ordinary man could endure the tongue lashings he did, he said he did love her. And so, without telling any of us, he phoned the Inspector of Education in the Chadswar ward and offered his services as a teacher of mathematics and English in Merengue. 2 days later, he proudly announced he had received a fax from Mr. Ngoko, the headmaster of Junction Gate High School. There was an opening and he was to come at the beginning of the next term. Did he say how many trillions of zip dollars they'd pay you? The wife asked scornfully. We'll sort that out when we get there, my father replied, quietly retreating to the sanctuary of his desk. You may have plenty of brains, Joseph, but you've got no sense, she called after him. I hoped my father would do something to make me proud of him. He might have been a good teacher, but, though I was loath to admit it, there was part of me that agreed with the wife. My father could be very impractical. A rural school, Junction Gate High, what kind of name was that? We are going to Merengue. You got what you wanted, my father replied, opening a book and closing the conversation with the wife, who stormed out of the house, slamming the front door. Maybe she wants some tea, Grace said in the silence that followed. I'm sure she'd appreciate that, said my father, cupping her cheek. Grace and I exchanged glances. The wife was not even happy when she got her own way. Can there really be enough for everyone? I asked once I was alone with my father. He looked up from his book, puzzled. Diamonds, I mean. Lots of people are going to Merengue, Baba. At school, everyone knows someone who's packed up and left for the diamond fields. I read in the paper that the government is inviting people. How can there be enough? Although my father was a slight man with the hands of a piano player, his long, straight neck gave the impression of height, which was particularly useful in his dealings with his pupils, and he was the owner of a formidable voice capable of every nuance required of a teacher. He could bellow instructions across a soccer pitch, but also console a disheartened 8th grader. Patson, we are not going for the diamond, son. We are going to start a new life. We are going to be a part of Sylvia's family. So we're leaving because she doesn't like it here in Bulawayo? Why do we have to listen to that? Patson, I will not have you speak badly of Sylvia. Remember, you must always keep your words soft and sweet, just in case you have to eat them, I said, finishing the old Shona proverb. When your mother died, Patson, I knew I had to find another wife. I had hoped you would like Sylvia, that she would be a good friend to you and a good mother to Grace. But what you have to understand is that when you marry your partner, you are marrying a whole new family. We have to think of the Bundas as our new family, Patson. They will look after us and help us settle in Merengue. You can meet your cousin Johnny. He's your age, and you'll probably be classmates at school. And despite what Sylvia says, I am not going to Merengue to become a diamond miner. I am a teacher. I will always be a teacher. But the change will be good for us all. I hated the faraway look in my father's eyes as he struggled to explain why we were poor. This was not the future he had planned for himself when he was a graduate fresh out of Harare University, he said, and he seemed puzzled at how obtaining food and rent seemed so difficult. It was a rare moment in which I had his complete attention, the perfect opportunity to ask him why, of all the women he could have chosen, he had chosen Sylvia. Did he truly love her? Did he not see how she made him less of a man? I let the moment pass. For a while there was peace in the house as we packed our things and sold what could not fit in the boot of the car that Uncle James had organized for us. At the end of the school term, we said goodbye to our neighbors and drove 14 hours east towards our new lives. We sped past a donkey cart clattering along the side of the road, a sign that read Merengue 20 kilometers, a burned-out shop advertising Coca-Cola, and an old woman selling pecan nuts from under a grass hut. On the road ahead, soldiers in olive green fatigues jogged in formation. They bore down on us until the driver had no choice but to pull off the road. They were singing Chimurenga, a war song, and the beating rhythm from the throats and the feet of 50 men filled our car, then faded away as we returned to the road heading to the hump I had named Elephant Skull. I reached for my shell phone. There were 2 messages from Sheena. How are you? Smiley face. Running this afternoon. Wish you were here. Frowny face, frowny face. I hate doing Aggies Hill alone. And back from my run. What's up? How many bars you got? What a WhatsApp? I was disappointed, but a bit relieved that she did not mention what had happened between us, but I could not stop thinking about it. In her bedroom, a few days before I left Bulawayo, I had kissed my best friend. And although a part of me wished I had not, another part wanted to kiss her again. I had known Sheena since primary school. She was my running partner in the Milton High cross-country team. After we kissed, though, it suddenly felt as if we were strangers, embarrassed to be alone with each other. I knew that if I could have gone for a good long run up Aggies Hill, we could have sorted it all out. But during the last few days of term, Sheena and I had circled one another, making sure we were always in the comfort of a crowd, and then the term had ended and I had left. My thumbs flew over the keyboard, but reception was patchy and my message did not go through. I groaned. If connectivity in Marangia was bad, I would be stranded in offline oblivion. Around the next bend, the driver swore at the sight of a police checkpoint in the middle of the highway. Nobody say anything. He slowed down as the policeman stepped onto the road up ahead and waved us down. I have my letter of appointment, my father assured the driver, reaching inside his jacket pocket. What use is that? The wife snapped. Let him do the talking, Joseph. He knows what he's doing. Remember what my brother said about the security around Marangia? We'll be fine if we do what the driver says. The wife took a lipstick from her handbag and freshened her hibiscus red lips. She grinned at herself, dabbing a tissue at the corner of her mouth, and polished her teeth with her finger. Once we stopped, the policeman peered into the car, taking in my father in the front seat, Grace in the middle of the back seat, me and the wife, who straightened her back, fluttered her eyelashes, and gave him her most radiant smile. The policeman stared at the curvy outline of her breasts before turning away. Our driver spoke politely, the policeman officially. My father started cleaning his glasses with his handkerchief, a sure sign he was worried. The policeman ordered the driver to open the boot. On the other side of the road, the policemen were searching 3 women whose arms were lifted above their heads while the men ran their hands over their breasts, down their backs, and between their legs. One of the women caught me staring as an officer half her age snapped her bra strap and joked crudely about where else she might be hiding her jewels. I looked away, embarrassed by her humiliation. All around the checkpoint there were stains of police at work, cigarette butts, empty whiskey bottles, bullet casings, and a scorched earth from cooking fires. Our car's boot slammed shut. The policeman walked slowly around one more time to peer one more time at the wife's breast. Then he turned to the driver. Kill yourself before I kill you. The driver nodded up and down. Okay, no problem, he said, climbing back into the car. This is not good at all. We must pay him. He's going to kill us, asked my father, bewildered. It's a code, Patson here calmly assured me. He wants to be bribed but cannot say it out loud. Instead, he's asking the driver to make him an offer to let us continue to Marangia. My father's dollars went quickly from his hand to the driver's and into the policeman's pocket, and once again we were speeding down the highway. The police have begun Operation End to Illegal Panning, the driver explained angrily. There are too many people going to Marangia. Now they are trying to stop them coming. We're lucky to find one who could be bribed. He punched a number into his phone and then spoke so rapidly I couldn't understand what he was saying. This is not good, he muttered again, stuffing the phone into his shirt pocket. You'll have to walk. I can't take you all the way. It's too dangerous. Suddenly we were off the highway, bumping and jostling along a dirt track heading deep into the bush. The wife shouted at him to slow down, but my father attempted to find out what the policeman had said, who he had phoned. Grace squeezed my hand. I think there's a problem no one wants to talk about, she said. We'll be okay, Grace, I whispered. I'm sure we're almost there. 20 minutes later, we stopped beneath an enormous baobab tree, its root-like branches reaching toward the sky. When I was a child, my father told me about Father Baobab, the goddess Mai, and how the moon found its way into the sky, but I could not remember the details. Beside the baobab's enormous trunk, a group of men sat on their haunches upon mats laid out on the ground. Who are those people? Asked my father. They are diamond dealers. This is the Baobab Diamond Exchange, the driver replied, stopping the car and shouting a greeting through his open window. 2 of the dealers hurriedly rolled up their mats and trotted off into the forest. Diamond dealers are always wary of strangers. Wait here. The driver got out the car and walked quickly over, talking and pointing back at the car. Whatever he said had no effect. All but one rolled up their mats and disappeared into the forest. "Joseph, do something," demanded the wife, opening the car door. "The driver knows what he's doing," my father soothed. "Don't just sit there." Now the driver had returned, opened the boot, and was dumping our bags onto the ground. "The highway is too dangerous. There are too many roadblocks. It is safer for you to go through the bush." "Now, wait just a moment," my father watched helplessly. "You can't just leave us," whined the wife. "We're in the middle of nowhere. James paid for you to take us to Merengue. He said nothing about that man knows the way," the driver interrupted her. "You can trust him." "Now, listen to me," said my father firmly, as if addressing a naughty schoolboy. "The arrangement was that you would take us all the way to Merengue." The driver shook his head and opened my door. "Out, out, quickly," he instructed Grace and me. We tumbled out the car as my father continued with his upbraiding. The driver got back into the car, slamming his door shut. "It's not far from here. You go east towards the mountain and the diamond fields are just on the other side. Maybe half an hour's walk. You'll be there well before dark." The engine roared to life and he drove away, leaving us in a cloud of dust. "How could you let him drive away, Joseph? What sort of man are you? What are we going to do with these bags? You are useless, a useless man," shouted the wife, her voice becoming harsher with each unanswered question. My father arranged the pile of luggage in neat rows, dismissing her words as if they were flies buzzing around his head. Grace looked at me and sighed. We both knew there were too many bags for us to carry. "Walking won't be so bad," said Grace. "We've been in the car for hours. I think we should go and ask that man to help us." Grace held out her hand, and together we walked over to the man standing at the foot of the baobab. In the settling dust, I guessed we had maybe 2 hours before dark. The baobab towered over the forest, its limbs glowing orange in the dying light, and the man watched our approach with as much interest as a buffalo watching a pair of ox-pickers. "He looks a bit scary. Keep smiling, Grace, and let me do the talking." The man was tall, with broad shoulders and muscular arms. His head was bald, and he had black eyes a little hooded. His face seemed chiseled out of hardwood by someone with little talent. His nose was bent completely out of shape. He wore a sleeveless maroon t-shirt and a white tie around his neck, neatly knotted, patterned with squiggly black lines. He was chewing slowly, the corners of his mouth stained with the telltale flecks of betel nut juice. He spat out a long stream of blood-red saliva and put another nut into his mouth. The closer we got to him, the smaller and more insignificant I felt. He was the ugliest man I had ever seen. "I'm smiling, Patson, but it doesn't seem to be helping," Grace whispered, gripping my hand. "My name is Patson Moyo." I tried to make my voice as strong as possible. "We need to get to Merengue." The man considered me silently, his bloodshot eyes never leaving my own. Both of his cheeks carried scars, rigid and glossy, like two frozen tear lines. I had heard of initiation rites where 14-year-old boys' cheeks were branded with a heated needle after they had proven themselves as warriors. He dismissed me and shifted his gaze to Grace. "Please show us the way," her voice trembled. My father joined us, the wife followed, still swearing loudly. "Why do you want to visit the eye?" the man asked my father in a deep, foreign-sounding voice. "I am Joseph Moyle," my father offered his hand. "My family needs to get to Merengue before dark." The man spat another stream of red saliva at my father's feet and ignored his outstretched hand. "I can't help you. If you love your family, Joseph Moyle, follow that track to the highway and go back home. The eye is not for you. Once you go in, you will never come out," he said, and started walking away. My father did nothing to stop him. I knew that if this man left us, we would be alone in the bush and we would have to walk miles back to the main road. I also noticed his curious glance at Grace, and I was sure I had seen a spark of compassion. "James Bunder will pay you if you take us to him," I said. The man stopped. He turned around and his black eyes bored through me. "James Bunder? You know Bunder?" "James Bunder is my brother," said the wife, producing her most luscious smile. "The boy is right. My brother will pay you." He glanced at the wife, at our pile of luggage, and then back at Grace and me, weighing up his options. I guessed that if James Bunder found out he'd abandoned us in the bush, it could be very bad for him. Finally, clearly irritated with the decision he had to make, he spoke. "Take only what you can carry. You have a long walk ahead of you." The wife protested immediately, but for once in his life, my father spoke firmly to her. "We have no choice, Sylvia. Do as he says." We quickly sorted through our luggage, repacking some of it into smaller bags. The wife fussed about what shoes to take, while my father sorted through books and teaching materials. Grace selected a soft toy and packed the others away. "I'll pick you up soon," I heard her whispering. Dispassionately, I surveyed all that I owned. Spread out on the ground against the vast bush, my belongings seemed insignificant. Jeans, t-shirts, a couple of underpants, and socks. The first things to go into my rucksack were my pens, my phone, my diary, and my best pair of running shoes. And then we were ready. My wife and my father had stopped their arguing. He would carry one of her suitcases. The other three, packed mostly with clothes, were tossed into a hollow space inside the baobab tree. Tomorrow, when you have a car, well, I cannot say, but they might still be here, the man said, shrugging. I recognized his lyrical accent as French. Now we start to walk. What's your name? Asked Grace. Bobakar, he answered. And how far is it to Meringue? Asked the wife. Don't worry about that, said Bobakar. If we are caught, they will shoot us and bury us until the wild animals carry away our bones. If you want to worry, worry about getting to Meringue alive. Diamond Boy, Chapter 3. We walked through the forest for what seemed like the longest hour of my life. At every rustle in the grass we fell to the ground, waiting until Bubakar gave us the all clear. The bags I carried grew heavier and heavier. Blisters bubbled upon my palms. My feet ached, but I walked on, never losing sight of Bubukar's broad back. Before each clearing, Bubukar stopped until he was sure there was no danger, then signaled us forward. His cautious progress and watchful silence infected us all. Yet we were not alone. All around us were the sounds of the bush noisily preparing for night, the barking, scuffling of a troop of baboons heading for high ground, the mournful caw of the nightjars nesting in the trees, the scratching and burrowing of smaller animals. The sun had already disappeared behind the hills. Baobabs towered over the forest like giant watchmen. Night seemed only moments away. As the darkness spread over us, all the shadows faded, and the stars began to pinprick their way into an ink-smudged sky. I was surprised to see the wife struggling with her luggage without complaining, and my father quietly urged Grace on with promises of chocolate and rest. But I saw the worry in his eyes. Elephant Skull was no nearer. The driver had lied. Once again Boubacar raised his hand, and we dropped to the ground, crouching next to our luggage. "What are you watching for?" I asked, crawling up as close to him as I dared. "If you tell me, I can help." "Policemen, soldiers, militias," he whispered, scanning the clearing for any movement. "They will call the syndicate guards, and you will stand no chance. Now stop talking and tell your mother." "She's not my mother. Tell her she must leave those bags behind," he continued. "She is slowing us down. We have a long way to go." "How much further?" "5, maybe 6 hours." I glanced back at my family. My father was pulling Grace to her feet. He had tied her bag to his own and was dragging them along the ground behind him. The wife rose slowly, sweat trickling down her face. "They can't walk for another 6 hours," I whispered. "You would rather sleep out here?" So we trudged on. Above us arched the Milky Way, a canopy of millions of glittering stars, brighter than anything I had seen in the city. As beautiful as it was, the night was full of terrors for Grace. I offered to give her a ride and slung my backpack around to my chest. "I'm fine, Patson," she said, trying to be brave. "But I'm not. I need you to hug me tight," I answered, insisting she climb onto my back. I have always adored Grace. She is the one person with whom I can truly be myself. I never have to worry what she thinks about me, never had to explain myself. I am her big brother with capital letters, and that is all that matters. I do not tell her everything, not any more, but I have always loved the way she listens to me with seriousness and complete attention, as if I am the only person in the world. It is a habit she has inherited from my mother, and I love her for it. Grace clambered onto my back and wrapped her arms tightly around my neck. "I am scared of the bats, Patson," she whispered into my ear, "and Bubukar scares me too." "How old are you, Gracie?" "You forgot how old I am." "I forgot. You're 7, 8, right?" "No, I'm 10." "10? Well, almost 10. Then you must know that the bats are the butterflies of the night. They sleep during the day and can't wait to stretch their wings after dark. Imagine sleeping through the whole day and only waking up when the sun sets. You'd be hungry and stiff. That's why they zip through the air, eating mosquitoes and playing with one another. And as for Bubukar, he just looks scary. He speaks funny. That's because he speaks French. He'll look after us. He knows where he is going." The violent crack of a rifle frightened a flock of herons from a nearby tree. They launched themselves from their perches, exploding in a shower of white feathers. We fell to the ground. "We must move," urged Bubakar. "Come on, get up." The terrain was uneven and difficult to navigate in the dark. I stumbled forward with Grace on my back, another round of gunfire crackling through the night. Grace's grip tightened around my neck, but I ran on. Glancing over my shoulder, I saw lights from a vehicle scudding through the bushes, closing in on us. Loud voices. Suddenly, from my right, someone broke cover and ran across my path, followed by two more people, their frightened faces lit up by the headlights. Run! Leave your bags! Leave everything! Ordered Boubacar, as he swept Grace off my back, running with her in his arms. My father clung to his briefcase, pulling the wife by the hand. When she would not leave her suitcase, he gathered it up and pushed her in front of him. Dropping my own suitcase, I swung my backpack higher onto my shoulders and followed Boubacar. While my stomach knotted in fear, a new power surged in my legs. Gunshots boomed across the bush as the lights from the vehicle grew brighter. The wail of a baby hurriedly silenced the scream of a woman in pain. For hours we had not seen anyone. Now, flashed out by guns and beams of light, people were running all around us, darting from tree to tree. Where had they come from? Boubacar must have known there were others heading for Marangi. He must have seen them, made sure we had avoided them. Now our cautious progress had become a noisy flight, with vehicles pounding through the bush behind us. Keeping up with Boubacar was hard, but I had to stay close to my sister. I would not lose her in this chaos. With no warning, Boubacar pulled me into an outcrop of boulders, and my sister scrambled off his back into my arms. Tears streamed from her eyes, and I held her tight against me, trying to still her trembling. Shh, it'll be okay. Shh, don't cry. More gunshots, frightened voices. Over here. Boubacar beckoned to my father and the wife, who were sprinting towards us. My father's face gleamed with sweat, yet he clung to his briefcase, dropping it only to sweep Grace into his arms and lie with her flat on the ground. Keep your heads down, ordered Boubacar as we scrambled into the rocky shelter. Boubacar quickly disappeared among the boulders above us. My father squeezed Grace into the small space hidden by grass and wedged it in his briefcase as if it were a magically protective barrier in front of her. The wife whimpered as an approaching male voices barked orders. Within seconds, vehicles had converged near our hiding place, and a second pair of lights swept past us. Without warning, three soldiers ambled from the cover of the bush, automatic rifles held loosely in front of them, talking in low murmurs. A black-booted gun-metal presence filled the clearing not more than 10 meters away. One of the soldiers' red-tipped cigarettes pulsed in the darkness. Then the trees across from our hiding place blazed in the harsh glare of the headlights, and I realized that if the soldiers were just to look in our direction, they would be blinded by the light. Boubacar had chosen our hiding place well. My father squeezed my wrist. Grace was safely behind us, the wife's trembling hand clasped over her mouth. I could be grateful to her, at least, for that. Four young men and a woman stumbled into the glare of the jeep's headlights, bags clutched to their chest. With rifles pointed, three soldiers followed close behind. A second jeep stopped abruptly, its driver descending on the troop trapped in the light. Lie down, the driver screamed, and a young man fell to the ground, covering his head with his hands. Now stay down, because you do not think when your head is upright. With the sole of his boot, he ground the man's face into the dirt, while the soldiers ripped into the people's bags. The men were ordered to take off their shirts and trousers, and the soldier, his rifle now slung over his back, carefully searched their clothes. What are you doing here? The driver asked the man trapped under his foot. Where are you going? A jumble of terrified gibberish came from the ground, and the driver smashed the butt of his rifle into the man's legs. A crack of wood against bone, a cry of agony as he jerked into a tight ball. The driver sauntered over to the other three men and the woman. His rifle burst into life, spitting bullets into the dirt, the deafening noise echoing off the rocks. But it was not death or silence that followed. Instead, the night was filled with the screams of terror as the men and the woman clung to one another. Yes, you are alive. Now go, and never return, or you will be dead, said the driver, prodding the men with the tip of his weapon. Not you, he said to the woman, and nodded to one of the soldiers. With no further words, she was thrown into the back of one of the jeeps, while the terrified men dragged away their wounded male companion. The night swallowed them whole. Find anything? The driver asked a comrade who was rifling through the clothes. Nothing. Maybe she can tell us, he said, pointing to the woman in the jeep. It will be fun to find out, said the driver. Chuckling, the soldiers clambered into the vehicle and drove away. The second jeep followed, and soon the throbbing of their engines faded, the beams of their bobbing headlights growing smaller. We did not move. Then my father's grip on my wrist softened, and he wiped the sweat from his face. I scanned the darkness. I think they've gone, I whispered. My father inched forward on his stomach. Patson, Grace's small voice came from behind the briefcase. I shuffled forward to peer at the rocks above us. Boubacar? My father raised his hands to quiet me. I pointed upwards, and he cautiously rose to his feet, keeping an eye on the clearing. Boubacar, he called. No one answered. Diamond Boy, Chapter 4. I scrambled out of our hiding place and stared into the darkness. My father called Bubakar's name again, his voice panicked. He clambered up in the rocks, calling louder. Grace slipped out from behind the briefcase and stood up. I don't like it here, Patson. I want to go home, she said, a sob catching in the back of her throat. We can't go home, said the wife, looking wildly about her. We have to go get to my brother. James will help us. We have to find James. As much as I hated to admit it, I agreed with her. The option of going home had long since passed. We had no choice but to get to Meringue and find James Bunda, the man responsible for all this. Diamonds for everyone, he had said to the wife. He had not told her about the roadblocks, the soldiers attacking people in the night. He had not told us the truth. And then my father appeared grinning, with Boubacar by his side. Grace ran to them and threw her arms around one of Boubacar's legs. Thank you for coming back. Boubacar placed his hand on her head and bent down to her. I didn't leave you, mademoiselle. I had to see if the soldiers were gone. Who were those poor people? I asked. Those boys wanted to be men. It is the way here. When you have worked in the mines, you are no longer a boy. If you make it into the eye, you are seen as a man. And they did not make it? My father asked. No, their luck ran out. They have been camping in the valley near the diamond fields, waiting for a chance to fill their sacks with soil. What did those soldiers want from them? I asked. Diamonds. The police usually patrol this area, but I've never seen soldiers before. This is something new. I don't know why the army is here. And the woman? Asked the wife, but Boubacar just shook his head. Do we still have far to go, Boubacar? I'm tired, said Grace. He crouched and laid his hand gently on her shoulders. I need you to be brave, Mademoiselle Gracie, and when you are tired I will carry you. You do not need to be afraid. Then he added, While I am here, you can wear my magic tie. Whoever wears it cannot be harmed. Would you like that? When Grace nodded, Boubacar solemnly took off his tie and placed it around her neck. We gathered our luggage and again walked out into the night, knowing better than to ask how much longer it would be to Merengue. A full moon rose above Elephant Skull and bathed us in a silvery glow. I had lost all sense of time and space, the shimmering sky too bright to find the stars to mark our progress. We had walked 3, 4, maybe 5 hours, I could not say. I remember stopping briefly and drinking foul, dark water from a muddy pool. I remember the wife weeping and my father putting his arms around her, dragging her to her feet. I remember tripping over tangled roots in the dark, rolling down an embankment, and Boubacar lifting me off the ground, dusting me off, pushing me forward. Uncle James was responsible for all of this. Uncle James Bunda. In the sleeping forest, I concentrated on putting one foot in front of the other, through the heaviness of sleep. Although the heaviness of sleep deadened my arms and legs, my neck dropped. My neck drooped into my chest and I jerked upright. I stubbed my toe, grazed my arms, awake enough only to walk forward into the night. I dreamt of the cool fridge water, clean, soft sheets, and Sheena. And then I glimpsed a shadow in human form staring at me. The ash-grey figure was no taller than me and stood at the foot of a hulking mimosa tree, leaning on a pair of crutches. I could not tell if it was a girl or a boy, alive or dead, and whether I was dreaming or awake, but it stared at me with eyes that were real enough. The figure lifted its dust-grey arm and pointed back where we had come from, its lips moving with words I could not hear. Moonlight spilled through the branches, forming a halo of silver around its head. I was too tired to be afraid, but as I moved towards it, the figure turned and disappeared into the mimosa's low-hanging branches. The forest was silent as an empty church. I trudged on. Boubacar's pace had never slowed. Grace slept like a rag doll on his shoulder, arms flung limply around his neck. I was too exhausted to think about what I had seen or what it had meant. That would come later. All I could think of was sleep. Boubacar suddenly stopped and raised his hand. Once again we fell wearily to the ground, no longer concerned with the noise we made. Boubacar whistled 3 short notes like the call of a nightjar. Grace did not stir. My eyelids dropped shut. Behind me, the wife's urgent whisper roused me. Look, Joseph, look! A single flame rose from the ground and floated in the air only 10 paces ahead of us. I rubbed my eyes as one by one small flames rose out of the earth and hovered in the air. In their flickering light, figures emerged from the ground. Their faces were stained with grey dust and sand, their bloodshot eyes illuminated by the light of wax candles they held in front of them. Some carried long iron rods, others bore pickaxes upon their shoulders. My skin prickled, the rest of me awake. Wordlessly they stared at us through the darkness, their grey faces all holding the blank, incurious expressions. I had heard of zombies roaming the earth after midnight, but had never believed those stories until this moment. Their silent presence was unworldly. If Grace had been awake, she would have screamed. Could I still be asleep and dreaming of the undead rising from the earth? Was the figure I had seen standing under the mimosa tree one of these creatures? Bubakar had not moved since the creatures emerged from the ground. He whistled the same three short notes again, and from the darkness a voice responded in a language I had never heard before. Wait here, Bubakar whispered, crouched down beside me and laying Grace gently on the ground without waking her. If anything happens to me, you take your sister and run for your life. Do not look back. Do not wait for your father or his wife. You run. You understand, Patson? Faster than you ever have before. There was no doubting the warning or the large knife in his right hand. He quickly pulled a short iron bar from his bag and rose to his feet, walking slowly toward the waiting figures, the iron bar in full view, the blade concealed behind his back. I glanced at Grace, still protected by her armor of sleep. As we huddled together on the ground, more glimmers of candlelight emerged and slowly surrounded us. I strained to hear a familiar word in the strange murmuring language to make sense of imminent danger. Fully awake now, my body hummed with tension and fear, knowing that at the first sign of danger I would sweep up Grace and run directly toward the flames, scattering these zombies with a living scream and taking my sister to safety before she woke up. They would not devour her and drag her to their shallow graves. Easy, son, it's all right, whispered my father. What are they, Baba? They are diamond miners working at night, Patson, digging through the earth. We must be in the Marangi diamond fields. More figures emerged only a few meters away, but they seemed oblivious to our presence, intent on the work. In the dull yellow light of lanterns and candles, they lifted heavy sacks onto their heads and vanished into the adjoining forest. But why at night? I do not know, son, my father admitted, squeezing my arm. They'll take me to my brother, declared the wife. We'll be all right once we get to James. She made to stand up, but my father held her back. A foreign voice barked an instruction, and one by one the flames disappeared. A blanket of darkness descended once again over the field. Bubakar returned, no longer carrying his knife. The Maze Zulu syndicate has an understanding with Banda. They have allowed us to cross their section of the field and go on to Banda's camp. Turning to a thin man standing silently at his side, Bubakar said, This man will escort us. Leaning on a long iron rod, the grey man's bony frame did not seem capable of holding the heavy sack on his back. He looked as exhausted as I was. Thank you, said my father. Thank you very much. The man did not respond. Instead, he stabbed his iron rod into the ground for support and began to make his way through the field, skirting its shallow craters. Bubakar picked up his bag, packed away his own iron bar, and carefully lifted Grace into his arms to follow close behind. I allowed my father and the wife to go ahead of me and took up the rear. Another dust-grey man clambered out of a hole, blew out his candle, and after a brief exchange with our new guide, joined us. He too carried a sack on his back. They mine at night to avoid sharing their ore with the police, explained Bubakar. Some do work during the day, the live show they call it, but then the police breathe down their necks looking for ngodas. Ngodas? Raw diamonds. And the iron rods? My father asked. They are sharpened to chip away the rocks and break the earth. Then they load the ore by hand into those sacks, said Bubakar. Basic artisan mining techniques, mused my father. The diamonds here are low-quality industrial diamonds, often found in shallow alluvial deposits, accessible to anyone with a sharp tool, plenty of muscle, and an abundance of optimism. Shut up, Joseph, snapped the wife. You are showing off. Diamond Boy, Chapter 5. The wife got a second wind as we approached her brother's camp. She left my father and walked next to Bubakar, who ignored her endless chatter. I dared hope our journey was coming to an end. With each step through the darkness, I was moving further away from my life in the city. Even the car ride the day before seemed part of the faraway past. Sheena would be waking up soon, having breakfast and walking the familiar road to Milton High School. How could I ever tell her any of this? And I had no idea what was waiting for me in Merengue. The guide stopped, cocked his head, and then whispered hurriedly to the man behind him, pointing at figures running towards us. A loud police whistle blasted the night air, followed by angry voices. Our guides dropped their ore sacks and metal rods and sprinted away, leaving us standing there. If this was the end of our journey, caught by the police and driven away in a van, I thought, then so be it. I had had enough of this endless night. Bubakar passed the sleeping Grace to my father and instructed the wife to stand behind him. He swung his backpack to the ground and lightly twirled his iron bar in his left hand, the knife again in his right hand. But they were not police. Instead, four men approached wearing balaclavas, armed with knives and rods, one with the handle of a pickaxe casually slung over his shoulder. Mangombiro, said Boubacar, raising his knife. Miners who failed as diggers and steal from others, the worst kind of Marangi parasite. We will see if they have the stomach for a fight. The four men stopped, spread out around us. My father pulled me close, the wife clinging to his arm. Boubacar stood his ground, the beam of a torch lighting up the scornful look on his face. What do we have here? Said one man, a police baton twirling from his wrist. Trespassers? Thieves? Boubacar, his gaze firmly fixed on the masked man in front of him, did not reply. You know what we want, big guy. You can't be as stupid as you look. We can take it with or without blood. Your choice. Boubacar's size, stance, and silence had unsettled the leader enough that he stopped a healthy distance away. The other three men moved cautiously to his side. Step aside, the leader demanded. I mean it. Does your father know what you are doing, boy? Boubacar finally replied. The man's head jerked as if Boubacar had slapped him. Does he know how you prowl the night like a cowardly hyena? What would he do if he found out you prey on the defenseless people, stealing their day's work? Boubacar's tone dripped contempt. And do you give your father any of what you steal? Boubacar lifted his knife and pointed it slowly at each of them in turn. Or do you and your friends hide it from the Banda syndicate? The man glanced nervously at each other. And what would you do if your father do if your friend to your friends if he found out that you're running your own little business on the side? Boubacar goaded the leader. Have any of you clowns ever thought about that? The leader adjusted his balaclava to get a closer look at Boubacar. Boubacar, he exclaimed, pulling off his mask and gesturing to his companions to step back. He laughed, a tight, high-pitched snuffle that seemed even scarier than his anger, and quickly stuffed his balaclava into his back pocket. Boubacar did not lower his knife as he approached. Musi? The wife broke away from behind my father. Musi Banda, is that you? The man froze. It's me, Auntie Sylvia. You remember me? Sylvia from Bulawayo, she said with a girlish laugh. We should have arrived yesterday, but that driver deserted us after the first checkpoint. We had to walk. It's been terrible. Confusion, embarrassed laughter, and hurried introductions followed, during which Musi transformed from the thug to the family's welcoming representative. He sent one of his friends ahead to wake his father, and ordered the two remaining men to carry our luggage, laughing loudly at the misunderstanding, shaking my father's hand vigorously, and embracing the wife as if it were he who had rescued her. Boubacar let Musi take charge, and we were swept along. My father will be so pleased I found you, Auntie. I came here only to watch for strangers in our field. Everyone steals from everyone else. I thought you were Magombiro, you understand? Of course, Musi, of course, said the wife, leaning on his arm. We will explain that to your father. And your face, little cousin, he said to me, cuffing me painfully on the shoulder. You looked like you had seen the devil. Forgotten in the excitement, Boubacar put away his weapons and stood apart, observing our strange family reunion. He motioned for me to follow my family, but before I did, I slipped his tie from Grace's neck. Thank you, Boubacar. I handed it to him, looked up at the scarred, ugly face that was no longer scary. We would never have made it without your magic tie, said Grace. He fixed her with his sternest gaze, but a flicker of a smile played on his lips. I hope you will like your new family. He glanced at Musi, who was now leading the way. You will have a new life, Patson, one that will require all your courage. I will never forget what you did for us, I promised. You can have my necktie, Mademoiselle Gracie. It will keep you safe. Boubacar slipped the tie back around her neck and turned to leave. Boubacar, where do you come from? Asked Grace. The Congo, he replied. Now go. Tomorrow is here already, and your uncle will be pleased to have more hands working on his syndicate. Diamond Boy, Chapter 6. When I finally woke up 9 hours later, my cousin Jamie was sitting at the foot of my bed. The first thing I noticed was his smirk. His face was round with thick lips and a stubby, flat nose that looked like he'd come up short in a fist fight. His chubby legs were covered with grey dust, and his shins and bare feet were coated with mud. Then I saw the reason for his smirk. He had been reading my diary. My father says you're lucky to be alive. The contents of my backpack were strewn about the floor, and he was flicking through my diary like it was a magazine. Give me that, you have no right. I lunged at him. He waved the notebook, then tossed it onto the pile of my clothes. It's mine, and it's private. You didn't bring much, but your phone is cool, he said, pulling my phone from his pocket. Who's this Sheena chick? I sprang out of my bed and grabbed my phone. Jamu fell backwards, slamming his head on the corner of a cupboard. He wailed in pain and ran out of the room, calling for his mother. Serves him right, I thought angrily, stuffing my things back into my backpack. My father entered the room. Patson, what's going on? He was reading my diary and he took my phone. Remember, we are guests here, son. But that doesn't mean, Patson, you're better than this. I want you to apologize to Jammu. Smarting from my father's rebuke, I hurriedly dressed and then followed him down a corridor into the lounge. It looked more like a tool shed. It was filled with pickaxes, iron rods, sieve trays, and ore sacks. Moosey and one of the men from last night lounged on an old leathered couch drinking beer. The large flat screen television on the wall was on mute, showing only the strutting moves of a hip hop star, bling flashing from his wristbands and ears. From the backyard came the thump thump of a generator. Grace was being kept busy in the kitchen by the wife, and another woman stood at a stove cooking. Jammu was being fussed over by an older woman who scowled at me. Jammu, said my father, Patson has something to say. I trust it's not serious, Priska. Serious enough, the older woman replied. Her hair was cut short like a boy's, and she wore a loose t-shirt and red boxer shorts that did not quite cover her bloated belly. Her legs were coated with the same grey dust that marked every member of the Bunda family. This was not the normal dress of a Shona woman, but this was no normal family. Nothing to worry about, Joseph. I'm sure it was an accident, the younger woman said, leaving the stove and peering under Jammu's ice pack. Thank you, Kuda, said the wife, but Patson must apologize. He is your guest after all. Priska had not taken her eyes off me. My father gently pushed me forward. I'm sorry you hurt your head, I mumbled. My father squeezed my shoulder painfully. And that I pushed you. He's not really sorry, am I? Jammu protested. Jammu, did you take something that was not yours? Every head in the room turned towards James Bunda. He was sitting at the head of the table, bent over a small pile of stones spread out on a black velvet cloth. A cylindrical magnifying glass seemed stuck in his right eye, making his whole face look like a dried-up prune. He was a large man with thick, flabby neck and broad shoulders. His shaved head glistened with oil. With a pair of tweezers, he plucked a dark green pebble from the pile and studied it intently. The wife had often told us that her brother had once been the heavyweight champion of the Mutare region, with 16 knockouts to his credit. Although he had long since lost the muscles of a prize fighter, there was no doubting that he could still knock a man out with a single blow. Yet with his thick, gnarled boxer hands handling the tweezers and small stones as delicately as a surgeon. Bring your cousin, he said, not looking up. His words had an immediate effect on Jammu, who pushed away from his mother's fussing hands and scrambled off his chair, dragging me towards his father. Uncle James continued sorting the pebbles, examining each briefly, then placing them one by one into smaller piles. Jammu and I stood before him, and from the couch Moosey swiveled to get a better view. Then he pointed two fingers at me and cocked his thumb like the hammer of a gun. Now, Jammu, you must answer me truthfully. I will ask you again. Did you take something that did not belong to you? Banda spoke softly like he was asking about the weather. Jammu was clearly terrified, and suddenly I felt sorry for him. I was only looking at his phone, mumbled Jammu. So you didn't take his phone? Uncle James lifted another stone toward the light. Jammu hesitated. Jammu, I took his phone. Good, Jammu, you have spoken the truth. Now I will show you what happens when you take something that does not belong to you. It was my fault, Uncle James, I blurted out. I left the phone lying around, and I knocked him off the bed. Uncle James popped the magnifying glass out of his eye. So, the son of the school teacher defends the weak, he said, looking at me for the first time. Your name is Patson? I nodded. I hear a young lion in your voice, little prince. I shall remember that. He pointed the tweezers at me. Moosey, come here. Bring Daba. I want to show you something. The two young men ambled over to the table. James indicated a pile of pebbles on the velvet cloth. I am disappointed with yesterday's work, mostly in Gordas, one or two that might be a low-grade grazi, but it was a day of poor quality ore. What do you think? He asked, inviting them to inspect the stones. The two of them leant over the pile. Musie's eyes glimmered, and the tip of Zaba's tongue flicked over his lips. Look closer, but no touching, said Uncle James, lifting his hands away from the table. As Musi and Zaba bent lower, Uncle James clamped his hands onto their necks and smashed their foreheads into the table. Musi cried out in pain and reeled away, holding his forehead, while Zaba struggled under Uncle James's iron grip. Then Zaba's whimpering grew louder. Uncle James had inserted the tweezers into his nostril and was gripping the corner of his nose. He slowly twisted the tweezer, forcing the man to his knees. A dark pool of blood dripped onto the table. So, Jammu, what have you learnt? Asked Uncle James. You shouldn't, never take what doesn't belong to you, Jammu stammered. Good. And more importantly, never take what belongs to me. If you do, I will hurt you. He yanked out the tweezers, releasing Zaba. Come here, Moosey, he demanded, carefully wiping the tweezers on the edge of the velvet cloths. Next time you think about playing the Magombiro, I will really hurt you. Now, You two will return the sacks you stole and apologize to Alfred Mazuru. Then you and your friends will spend the rest of today and tomorrow working for the Mazuru Syndicate. I will be proud to hear that you have served 16 sacks each. As the young men turned to leave, Uncle James added, and Zaba, instead of listening to the boss's son, use the brains God gave you and make your own decisions. Now get out of here, both of you. Halfway out the door, Moosey shot me a glance as if I had been the one who had caused this humiliation. Then Uncle James turned his attention back to me. Patson, come here. I took a small step towards him, eyeing the tweezers warily. No, no, you don't need to be afraid, he chuckled. I want to show you my diamonds. Uncle James dropped a few stones into my hand. They looked like the coarse chips off a broken beer bottles, dark brown black and a strange shade of darkish green. You are holding over 3,000 ushas in your hands, Patson. Yes, that's right. 3,000 American dollars. Your son has never seen such wealth, Mr. Schoolteacher. He glanced at my father. And Patson, these ugly engordas can give you everything you want. Look closely. Feel their knobbly, smooth shapes. These are the stones of Mzimbu, the land spirits of Marenge. If you are good to your ancestors and your Shavi allows it, they will guide you to the Ngordas like these. But you have to be pure in your heart or your Shavi will hide from you. Are you pure of heart, Patson? I studied the tiny stones. It was hard to believe that I was holding 3,000 American dollars in the palm of my hand. It was beyond imagining. Uncle James gripped my wrist and turned my palm firmly until the rough, uncut diamonds fell back onto the table. I stared at the fortune that had slipped through my fingers. Uncle James studied me for a moment and then removed a small leather pouch hanging on a cord around his neck. A single glassy stone the size of my thumbnail fell onto the velvet cloth. You want to see my most precious stone, he said. This is the greatest gift for the Mzimbu, Agazari. This little beauty was one of the first diamonds found here. Cut and polished, it's a gem of tremendous quality. At least 8 or 9 carats, worth over 50,000 ushas. What do you think a stone like this could mean to your family, Patson? He seemed to be testing me, but all I could see was the sparkling white light of the stone, which he twirled lovingly between his thumb and index finger. You cannot hold the stone. You have to find your own, Patson, and it will define your future. I was vaguely aware of my father clearing his throat. He called my name softly, and I ignored him. But I should have listened. I should have stepped back, away from the Gerazi glittering between Uncle James's fingers. Instead, all I seemed able to do was imagine what that gift from the land spirits would do if it belonged to me. 50,000 American dollars, unimaginable wealth, money that would change our lives forever. We could eat meat every night. We could buy a house. My father could buy a car. I could go to university and my sister could go to a private school. An endless list of possibilities raced through my head. Do you want to be a man, Patson? Uncle James lifted the Garazi to the light again. I nodded, mesmerized by the diamond. Then it vanished into the leather pouch around his neck. Your initiation into manhood begins on the diamond fields. There you will learn what it is to become a man. Patson, said my father, come here, son. My boy will be going to school, James. The mines are not for him. I could be a miner. I could find my own stones. I do not need to go to school. Just a moment, Bob, I said, as Uncle James folded the corners of his velvet cloth around my future. The Banda family lived on Kodozi Farm, 30 kilometers away from the town of Mutare. The farm had once belonged to a prosperous white farmer, the largest tobacco and wheat producer in the district. Then the war veterans had invaded the property, run off the family, and claimed the land for themselves. The rambling thatched roof farmhouse still bore traces of that family. A glass-framed collection of faded photographs still hung behind the toilet door. Mounted on the living room wall were the heads of a bushbuck and a kudu, glassy eyes staring serenely over what had been. I wondered where this family had gone, and what they would think of the Kodozi farm's new occupants and all the dirty tools in their lounge. Later I found out that after the war veterans had moved on, the farm had been inhabited by local people who did a poor job of farming it. When diamonds had been discovered nearby, Uncle James had offered everyone living in the derelict land the chance to join his mining syndicate, on the condition that he took over the farmhouse. With Kodozi Farm as his headquarters, Uncle James had doubled the size of his workforce and soon become one of the richest men in Marangeh. But it was the food the Banda family ate that made the biggest impression on me. All morning I had been distracted by the delicious smells coming from the kitchen, and when we finally sat down for our first meal in Marangeh, I decided that I too wanted to be rich. Kuda darted in and out of the kitchen with large bowls of stewed meat, cornmeal, and mounds of sadza. Uncle James was served first, then Priska, then Musi, then Jamu, and finally the Moyle family. I had never seen such a feast, and I struggled to keep my hands under the table as my mother had taught me. Grace poked me in the ribs. "You're drooling, Patson." While we ate, Uncle James kept looking from my father to his sister and making disapproving clicking noises, as if he could not believe that his pretty sister had married my dour father. The wife wore a low-cut yellow summer dress, and her face shone with freshly applied makeup as she entertained everyone with her version of our journey. How she had berated the driver for abandoning us, how she was the one who had found Boubacar and ordered him to show us the way, how she had hid her luggage in the hollow baobab tree and made all the decisions for her terrified husband. Uncle James shook his head and laughed. "I know that place," he said. "I will send someone to collect your things from Father Baobab." "Oh, James," said Kuda, "can Sylvia and I go to Mutari and get her some new clothes? I'm sure the luggage has been stolen by now." I remember that Uncle James had two wives, and I realized that Priska must be the senior wife, mother of Lucy, and that Kuda was Jamu's mother. Only the very wealthy man could have two wives. My father listened passively as the wife continued to embroider her role as the protector, but interrupted her when she suggested that Boubacar had abandoned us. "I believe he was close by all the time, Sylvia." "Well, it certainly felt like he ran off when the soldiers started beating up those people," she replied. "I know this Boubacar," said Uncle James, drinking the beer Kuda had handed him. "He's a bodyguard for Farouk Abdullah, one of the richest diamond dealers here in Mutari. He is an out-of-work mercenary from the Congo who fought on the side of the rebels in the DRC. He can't be trusted." "Oh, he can," Uncle James insisted Grace. "He carried me on his back and let me wear his magic tie." "Hush, Grace." My father laid his hand on her arm. "But, Baba, Boubacar helped us. Without him we would never—" "That man was rude," interjected the wife. "He and Abdullah wanted to pay me peanuts for my diamonds," said Uncle James, waving his knife at my father. "Boubacar is not welcome on Banda Hill. You can't trust the Congolese." "I agree, brother. I said the very same thing," chirped the wife. Throughout the lunch, Priska eyed the wife while Kuda fussed over her as if she were a film star. Kuda was pretty, although not as beautiful as the wife, and they were roughly the same age. She seemed to have a kind word for everyone and never stopped smiling. Priska, on the other hand, was older, and despite the softness of her large stomach, she had a hard, thin mouth and a face like a squeezed orange. There was no mistaking which one of them was mistress of the house. "If the work was so bad in Bulawayo, why did you not go back to your village?" Priska demanded of my father. "Sylvia says you have land there." My father paused in his meal and looked at the wife for an explanation. "No, no, Priska, we wanted to come here," the wife said quickly, "to Merenge. The stories are all over Bulawayo about how good things are here. Besides, I haven't seen my dear brother in ages." Priska would not be distracted. When do you start at the government school?" "Mr. Ngoko said I should come as soon as I arrive." "Mr. Ngoko, the headmaster of Junction Gate High School?" Priska glanced at her husband, whose plate she was filling with a large second helping. "And where will you be staying?" she probed, ladling more delicious-smelling stew onto my bowl. "I believe government housing was mentioned." Uncle James slapped the table with his hand and laughed loudly. "Government housing? That's a joke. The school's broke, shut down, no pupils, and the headmaster's left. You're better off working the fields. I could use Patson. He looks strong." I glanced up at the mention of my name. "My son will be going to school, James." "But I could work on the mines after school, Bob," I interrupted, ignoring my father's frown. "Just think of all the money—" "That's enough, Patson. My boys haven't gone to school for 6 months. Not worth it," said Uncle James. "They learn more on the fields, right, Jamu?" Jamu nodded eagerly at his father, and I sneaked a glance to see if he was still angry with me. But he was piling more stew onto his plate, his head wound long forgotten. "Baba says that going to school is the most important thing in life," Grace declared, wiping her bowl with a piece of bread. "You didn't just learn stuff in the books, you learned how to understand the world." "I would like Jamu to go to school," began Kuda, but Uncle James raised his hand and she stopped talking, and the smile slipped from her face. "Is that so, Grace? And why is it that your father brought you all the way to Merengue?" Uncle James understand his eyebrows. "To understand the world?" "I tried to talk sense to him, brother, but he doesn't listen. What is wrong with having a nice house or a brand new car?" needled the wife. "My husband has something against being successful. Would you say no to having a motorbike one day, Patson?" I didn't reply because the truth would have betrayed my father. I could not understand why he was so reluctant to become a miner. He could see for himself that there were diamonds for everyone. "We will visit Mr. Ngoko this afternoon," said my father, ignoring the wife's eye roll. "When you come back, we'll talk," said Uncle James. Junction Gate High School was close to Kodozi Farm, but Priscilla offered us a lift in her pickup truck and dropped us off at a path that led to a series of green thatched roof rondavels behind a fence. Jamu, who had taken the front seat, watched us in the mirror as we climbed down from the back. School's over there, Priska dismissed us with a wave. Thank you for giving us a lift, Priska, replied my father, adjusting his old university tie and dusting off the only black jacket he still had. Priska clicked her tongue and shook her head. Listen to my husband and look after your family properly, she said. As she sped off, I wished I was the one sitting in the front seat of the pickup. I knew how pathetic we three must have looked to Jamu. Clutching his leather briefcase, my father took Grace's hand and started walking up the path toward the school. Lagging behind, I checked the reception on my phone. 3 bars and 2 messages for Sheena. Are you there yet? What's up? I got into X country team. And then, you still there? My thumbs danced across the keyboard. School amazing. Great new home. Great job for my dad. Smiley face. Priska was wrong. The school was not deserted. A woman was washing clothes in a tub in the playground. Dripping laundry hung on a washing line between the empty flagpole and the wobbly netball post. She looked up as we approached. Not open now, come back tonight, she shouted, beating the washing against a board. Excuse me, I'm looking for the reception for Mr. Ngoko. The woman glanced over her shoulder and clicked her tongue. Who's Ngoko? Another woman stood in the doorway wearing only a purple bra and shorts. I couldn't help but staring at her breasts and her oiled thighs. She eyed us through a haze of cigarette smoke. What do you want, mister? She asked. The headmaster of the school, Mr. Ngoko, said my father primly. The women glanced at each other. The one doing the laundry shrugged and shook her head. The purple bra woman blew a thin wisp of smoke into the air. There's no school here. I have never heard of this Ngoko. Is this Junction Gate High School? Used to be, not anymore, she said. What are you looking for? I am Mr. I mean, my father stammered as the woman pushed away from the doorway and approached us. Inside the classroom, I glimpsed a woman asleep on the mattress, her arm thrown over her face. Come on, Patson, called my father as he gripped Grace's hand and walked quickly toward another, bigger building. We'll have school for adults later tonight, Mr. Teacher. Come for a private lesson, shouted the purple bra woman. Lots to learn at our school, laughed the washerwoman, flapping a wet dress behind us. Inside the second building, we stopped at a dilapidated office and peered through the broken windows. More mattresses, hanging sheets dividing up the room, the smell of grease and fried chicken feet. What do you want? In what was once the school foyer, an old woman sat on a can, chopping a large piece of liver on a block of wood. I'm looking for Mr. Ngoko, the headmaster of Junction Gate High School. I've come to teach. Here, there's no other work than cooking. You know people, they'll eat when they're hungry, that's all. We sow corn, we sow pumpkins. Nothing comes but stones. Truly, we are suffering. You look for corn, you look for pumpkins, but there is nothing. When the rain didn't fall, we didn't find those things. The woman sliced cleanly through the purple liver, peeling off the thin membrane and dropping it piece by piece into oil in a pot bubbling on the gas burner. My father looked wildly around him. He began walking down the corridor, opening doors, calling for Mr. Ngoko. Grace and I stood there, fascinated by the woman's wrinkles, by her small hands and the knife blade flashing through the meat. The cooking smells started to turn my stomach. I sit, I cry, I finish. I look for firewood, I go home, I cook. Yeah, always cook for the boy who must eat or he dies. This soul, it wasn't happy. Oh, that fellow. He left me 2 weeks ago. No children, so no school. I needed a room. Photocopying, they say. Okay, I say. Baba, I called after my father. The Gogo knows something. I felt uneasy at how she jabbed her knife in my father's direction. Those low-down women, they no good. They bring trouble. There's trouble enough, She waved her knife. They come from Harare wanting money. Ho, ho. They wait for men who work the pits of fury, Those that drink the breasts of Banda. About Mr. Ngoko, my father reminded her. Ask him, he knows, she said, pointing to me. She said he left 2 weeks ago because there were no students. No children, so no school. We needed the rooms, confirmed the old woman, plopping the last piece of liver into the pot and stirring it with a stick. My father dropped his briefcase and slowly slid to the floor like a tall building collapsing in slow motion. He closed his eyes, lifted his knees, and his head fell into his hands. Baba, Grace gathered him in her small arms. Let's go, Baba, I said. Come on. I shook his shoulder gently, aware I was touching my father in a different way. I wanted him to stand to assure me everything would be all right. I wanted him to straighten his tie, jab his glasses up his nose, and smile at me over the rims. I could not bear seeing my father sitting on the ground in his black jacket and university tie, so close to the old crone stirring her pot of liver stew. Baba, Baba, get up, Grace pleaded, shaking his arm. Slowly he lifted his head. He stared at us with hollow eyes. Then he pulled Grace into his arm and hugged her fiercely. It's okay, Gracie. This is just temporary. Just a temporary setback. That's all you have in the end, said the old woman, sipping the foul-smelling broth. Your children, hmm? You're a lucky man. All I've got is a boy who's dead already, dying every day, the sickness, hmm? But I've got food for him tonight. She offered me a sip, but I lifted my father off the floor, picked up his briefcase, and together we walked back into the fresh air and blazing sunshine. Who were those women, Baba? Asked Grace. Washerwomen, Grace. Just washerwomen, replied my father, loosening his tie and slipping off his jacket. Your briefcase, I said, wanting to hand him back his dignity. Thank you. Then he said the unimaginable. I don't need that anymore. My world tilted. We walked on in silence, Grace holding his hand and me his briefcase. I didn't want to ask the obvious question, but it tumbled out when the silence became unbearable. What are we going to do now? I dreaded he might say we would return to Bulawayo, or he would search for another teaching job, but my father's answer, which came quietly and in his characteristically calm manner, was completely unexpected. We are going to become diamond miners, son, and when we have enough money, we will go to Harare, and I will find a teaching job, and you can finish school and go to university. We will get a nice house, and we will all be fine. We mustn't be downhearted. Diamonds for everyone. It cost my father a great deal of pride to ask Uncle James if he and the family could join the Banda Syndicate. It was an admission that he had failed to provide for his family, something that every Shona man sees as his duty. He must have known that in Uncle James's eyes he was now no better than those who had begged for work on the mine, a humiliating end for a man who had been to university and worked in a profession, digging in the dirt. Back on the dozy farm, my father sat on the edge of the couch, his black book straight hands covering both knees, while Uncle James drank beer and watched TV. My father took a deep breath before he raised the issue, and true to character, used far too many words. I was wondering whether you might consider me useful in your mining operation. I don't want to be an imposition, but if there was a role I might be able to play, it would be greatly appreciated. He should have stopped there, but I've been reading extensively on the extraction methods of alluvial mining, information I would be happy to share with you and implement in the field. Perhaps I could be useful as a bookkeeper. I am quite competent with figures. I was embarrassed for him, ashamed too. He spake so earnestly, like a schoolboy. Kuda and Priska exchanged knowing glances, and I squirmed in the suddenly silent room. You'd like to work for me? Uncle James considered him blankly. My father swallowed. Yes, if you think there might be a place for me. The wife raised her eyebrows, a glint of triumph in her eyes. When Uncle James spoke, his voice was mocking. Good decision, Mr. Teacher. You can start demonstrating your extraction methods tomorrow. Now, Jammu and Patson, come here. He gripped our forearms and pushed us together until our shoulders touched. You want to become a miner, Patson? I could see the stones in my hand again, sparkling bright with promise. I want to be a miner, Uncle James. Patson, interrupted my father, his face stricken. And you will teach me in the evenings, Baba. I promise I will not abandon my schoolwork. It's men's work, said Uncle James, ignoring my father and gripping my arm. I'm not afraid to be a man. We shall see, boy. Jammu, I want you to show this prince cousin of yours around the mines. Teach him, he commanded. And Patsy, I am expecting great things. I think you've got the eye. And now, you two will be friends, all right? Jammu smiled lamely as I offered him my hand. We shook solemnly. No one disobeyed James Banda. A diary entry. Marange, Kodozi Farm, 20th Feb. I'm in bed writing by the light of my phone. Jammu's snoring. The farmhouse is quiet. Crickets chirp outside. I don't know if my father is disappointed or pleased with me. All day he listened to the Bunda family but didn't say much. He seemed 100 miles away, and then the wife told him he should be more grateful to Uncle James. She's never satisfied. Today I held 3,000 US dollars in my hand. I don't understand why my father can't see coming to Marange as an opportunity. If he had 3,000 US dollars, he could do whatever he liked, and he wouldn't have his wife on his back the whole time. What's wrong with having plenty of money? Money makes things happen. Money makes you feel good. It can buy you knowledge and respect. It can inspire you to do good things. When I leave the mines, I'm going to be rich and show my father that I can be a man. So much has happened in the last 24 hours. I met Boubacar, got chased by soldiers, saw zombies come out the ground. There is one thing I can't get out of my mind, the ash-grey figure standing under the mimosa tree, trying to talk to me. Was it a spirit? It gives me the creeps just writing about it, but it's time to stop and sleep. Tomorrow, the mines of Merengue.